Okay, good afternoon. My name is Ronen. If you don't know me, I'm the IDF spokesman, and in the next few minutes I will try to show you the way I see things, the way my unit sees things. These are organizations that have been mentioned here. I have been in this capacity for the last 13 months, and every day is a lesson. Every day the lesson repeats itself. That is, the media is something wonderful that everyone is interested in, especially people in the media, because that's what they work at, and they are part of the experience. And I think that some of the things that have been said here, I see it from a completely different angle, in a completely different way, and that's what I'll try to argue here. I think that the claim that the problem about these last 13 weeks is an image that was not taken is a misunderstanding of the world. The pub in Marmor makes no difference to me. It's not a target audience of mine. I have no intention of making it one. I think that the Le Monde headline on a certain day is also an out-of-date sort of test. And what I will like to talk about is the war over hearts and minds. And at the end of the day, the State of Israel and the IDF spokesman and their partners have huge achievements in this area, and I'll talk about them in just a moment. Before we go into cognition and what we said, why are we here? On March 30th, the Hamas terrorist organization took Hamas activists wearing civil clothes with their families, adding to them civilians who were forced to be there at the fence every Friday in an attempt to break down the fence, cross over to the Israeli side, breach Israeli sovereignty, harm Israeli infrastructure, abduct soldiers, go into Jewish communities and take lives. And in all of these parameters they failed. They couldn't get 1 million people to the fence, they couldn't cross the border en masse, they couldn't abduct soldiers or fundamentally harm infrastructure. They wanted to have far larger figures and tell you atrocities about what we did to them and the terrible things we've done, and there are very few such stories, and they are far from being atrocious. They wanted to harness the Palestinian street, first of all in Gaza, and failed, then in the West Bank, and failed, then in the Arab world, and failed. And they wanted to be legitimized. I don't remember any Arab state convention or any sort of call about what, or declaration about what happened in the last 13 weeks, but it did have one achievement, and that is to place Gaza on the international agenda. But I don't think that in order to do that, so much needed to be done. It's an achievement that kind of happens quite easily. But the idea behind its activities was to delegitimize the IDF and legitimize their own Hamas actions. We come in peace, we're just a civil protest, and this entire narrative did not work, not even on the Palestinian streets. I have no idea why you're saying it's a narrative, it's one narrative versus another, since the Hamas narrative is not believed by anyone, not even Gazans themselves. 3 months in hindsight, if we go back to March 30th, the inhabitants of the south thought the fence would break down and people would be able to celebrate Seder night, but Hamas failed. IDF provided security. I think the polls that we took in the Israeli population are completely different from what you have demonstrated and shown here in those last 3 months. And I think that alongside the Hamas military failure, and you don't need me for that, there is a cognitive failure and a failure in the war of hearts and minds that is substantial. And I think that the Hamas attempt to target audiences is one that also failed. And the key thing I'd like to say in that respect is that the last 3 months have shown how much the IDF has already done, how far it has come. We saw a media campaign that was 12 weeks old, learning from 1 week to the next, a multi-audience work that is coordinated in many ways. One of the longest media campaigns have taken place here. and we learned from our mistakes, and we need to continue improving, but I think that it was a well-synchronized intelligence and media campaign, and for the first time in years there's actually been a directive or a proper order in the army for that, and it has many achievements. And I think that the word hasbara, or public diplomacy, is no longer used. I'm sorry, it keeps being used. We don't do that. We don't do hasbara anymore. I don't know what kind of role I was supposed to play there. I want to influence the enemies and international theaters' cognitive views, and I have partners who are wonderful. We all work together, and they also are making mistakes, and that's okay. They don't hide them. And that's as far as that is concerned. I think that the real test, and I like to repeat that, to take a certain day's headline is not the right test. And even if I were to bring a photograph of 62 Palestinians who died on May 14th, many of whom are terrorists, with names and pictures and addresses, and show each and every one of them carrying out a terrorist attack before dying, the headlines would not have changed. I mean, remember what happened in Jerusalem that day. Remember what happened in other places in Israel that day, and what the narrative that was being pushed in the international media that day instead. And I want to say one more thing. Part of the internal publications in Israel that talked about hasbara, and again it's an outdated term, during war, without looking at the details, without understanding them, actually had a detrimental effect on the Israeli public diplomacy effort. And I'm not saying that in an accusatory tone. We can all say whatever we want to say, as I am doing now. I think that before I get into the important and special things that we've done, which I don't think you know, I will tell you what we've done because we have to, because I'm a spokesman and you expect me to do that. The figures here are going downwards. There is no sort of exaggerated number. 50 million people have been reached by the ADF. There is no other media element that has done that. Even if you connect it one day to another, we have 50 people who joined the commanders on the ground. Some say that they didn't do enough, but they did. We have 240 interviews. I heard Joe saying, oh, the IDF kept connecting us correspondents to the commanders, and I'm so tired already. We had more than 230 publications visually with video and images. There are dozens of thousands of pictures from these events on IDF platforms, and we spoke personally with more than 300 people around the world who have been targeted as opinion leaders, who are ambassadors here or in the world, who are former commanders and people we want to reach. But these are the obvious. If I didn't do that, I had to go home. This you expect of me at any rate. What I want to tell you that's new is something that goes on from here. I'm talking about 6 tasks assigned to us during these 12 weeks and how we think that we did it. And I'm saying again that we've made mistakes too. The first assignment was to deter the enemy. And as part of deterring the enemy, we did a series of steps, took a series of steps designed to make the enemy, and people talked about public diplomacy and so on, but one of the main targets is the other side. And the first task was to deter the enemy. The first thing, which is the most obvious, is to say, listen, what you're doing is terrorism, and that's why we're going to use our greatest capabilities. Look at what we're using. And what did we say? We said the person who should have warned did their duty. That is a well-known phrase on the Arab street. We used it with a very broad campaign in Arab-speaking platforms throughout the 12 weeks. It was well internalized. It was one of the reasons why the masses didn't show up at the fence. With Kogat, we also had warning talks to people who were personally involved. Bus drivers, for instance, Kogat had such conversations, and even those who were not phoned up were warned. We also published on Israeli media what we did, how we're preparing, how many forces we deployed, and this next thing. And again, I heard here that it wasn't done, but it actually was done every single Friday. We gave out sort of flyers, through planes in the Gaza skies, messages written especially for that specific Friday with consultants whose job it was as part of deterrence. The second thing we did is to deter people personally, on a personal level, and I gave you a contemporary example, and again we're trying to impact conceptualization and branding. We see it as a terrorist attack orchestrated by Hamas. We did it quite often, but we kept reminding them. Do you remember the 2014 World Cup? It was different. Some sat watching it on television, some took part in Protective Edge. So we reminded them of the good things as well as the bad things and how things could be. So the first task is deterring the enemy, but it's not enough. The second task was to link to Hamas their involvement in terrorism and the understanding that it's not a peace riot, it's not a march of return or anything like that. I heard so many voices here, but I want to say absolutely, in all polls taken, Hamas themselves say that they have failed because they could not make these protests seem civil. Everyone realized it was terrorism. So our next task was to sort of delegitimize the enemy, and we said it was linked to Iran. And why? Because we understood that in the international theater we realized we have a consensus around Iran, and we also understood that on the Arab street too, that's where Hamas has a problem. First of all, because it's true, and second of all, because they're trying to conceal it. And therefore we had an English-speaking and Arab-speaking campaign each and every day for several weeks, the aim of which was to link Iran to these events. In the video that we showed before, again it's a Hamas mistake, there was a series, lines of children with photo of Qasem Soleimani, one of the biggest terrorists, and they're holding his picture and they're yelling, "Qasem, Qasem, we're here thanks to you." That's another one of the things that came up over the last few weeks.
What happened was that this man, Sheikh El-Fassi, is one of the leaders in Kuwait. He's got 17 million followers in his Facebook and Twitter. He's considered the supporter of the Palestinian opposition, and he liked our campaign. He said, "I'm against Iran." And he liked those platforms that found the involvement of Iran. Here he shows he's got 17 million followers. Show me one tool in Israel that can get to such a number of people in a few days. He conveyed our message, and because of that, there was a campaign in Gaza which said, Avichai El-Fassi, Avichai El-Bahir, who was the IDF spokesman in Arabic, as if it's one person. And he said that he is part of the Israeli propaganda, and the same thing happened to a Palestinian minister, Mahmoud al-Bash, who repeated those messages that we made. He took our messages and repeated them, and he also got a similar campaign. The other thing we made an effort was Pallywood. Games, an attempt to create erroneous or to try to stage injured people, to use children. These things were broadcasted and took part in many places, that the Hamas is forging the natural narrative, the civil narrative, that everything is organized. The other thing we did was to add the word terror to these events, and here as well I think it happened. Apart from events where we showed the images not of a cutter but of weapons that they used, and every Friday they used the hand grenades and side bombs and whatever, we showed it, and we linked these terrorists to the casualties, even their picture in a few languages, because we work in 6 languages. Everything that we do is published 6 languages, and many people use them. and of course to show that we're not talking about a civil event. The Hamas branded it as the return march, Auda, and we called it Fauda. It's not Auda, it's Fauda. This is a brand that we created of IDF, and it went for 12 weeks, 12 years. They did a hashtag of the Auda, which is as if it's return, and we put Fauda, which is a mess or chaos. And it was both in Hebrew and in other languages. I saw this, I said to my people, this is nothing. Millions of viewers, and this brand that shows that this is a terrorist act, got to millions of people. I don't know if they live in Malmö or not, but this is the way people saw it in the world. And the last thing, they tried to create a rift between them and the West Bank. This was a methodical campaign for a few weeks to say that at that time that you're fighting for defense with terrorist events. We enable normal life in Ramallah. The peak number of people who go to prayers in the Temple Mount, crossings, complete freedom of movement. The entire campaign was towards the Palestinian and Arab population. And you can see that the Palestinians is voting with its feet, and they didn't even participate in these events. So now from this mission, I want to go to a more challenging thing, and that is to legitimize our actions. Let them do that. You saw these pictures. If not, then you don't follow the spokesman, the army spokesman in other languages, but that's what they did. IDF in the Facebook and the Twitter, I could have selected two methods to say, look, there's no way to win this. The Guardian will remain The Guardian, the Le Monde will stay Le Monde, and the international media will say that they hear the two sides, but eventually go for them. I could do everything in a balanced way. But when we talk about Iran, the Israeli narrative, all in all, is accepted in the world. We decided to think outside the box and to do, apart from dealing with The Guardian and Le Monde, to do additional things to address these audience. For example, 3 languages. These are officers, women, wearing uniform, speaking in the mother tongue of that country. Millions of viewers. Karen is in English, more than 5 million just in this clip. And all she did was to tell the story. These are not civilians. It's 200 meters from the fence. They want to come and kill citizens in Israel. That's the narrative. The other thing, which was innovative, we brought people, especially to Israel. We said, either we pay your flight or you pay your flight, but come to Israel and hear what's going on here. Some of the things were supported by the Foreign Office and some of it by the IDF. We took a colonel in the British army. He saw with his own eyes what's happened, and then he talked about human rights, and he gave the Israeli narrative. He wasn't in uniform or anything. And we had dozens of conversations with the organizations in the world. Thousands of people. Every evening we sat and we reported in video conferences to various places in the world, to important countries, and we brought people here. You see some senior commanders of other armies who came to visit. The other thing was international organizations. We cooperated with these organizations, supporters of Israel, without anything with the IDF. They could come. By the way, the visual room of the IDF spokesman was open with hundreds of thousands of products that people could view at their leisure. Another thing we did for legitimacy, if there's a point where I feel that we couldn't bring the winning picture, he really had difficulty here. This is what Gaza looked like most of the time. This is the fence. It's not kilometers. This is the fence, and this is the picture. This is Gaza. That's what people see. Now, I'm not giving excuses that we This is the picture that people saw, and because of this, we decided to put into a visual picture live pictures. We connected our people to observation points of the Southern Command, and we broadcasted live all the pictures of the airplanes from the Air Force. You could see a black figure running to the fence, but we used all these pictures. It's a challenge. It didn't really work. We have to improve and to continue doing it in a better way. And that's the way I see it. And the next thing was communication. We took cranes in order to bring foreign reporters on the fence, on top of the fence, to put them on top of the fence to see live everything. So not every Friday and not every event and not in every shooting event, but until now, dozens of people in hundreds of events stood up on the fence, and they were exposed to what they saw, and we're going to continue with that. This is an installation and a crane we brought especially so that they can see things how they're happening. Taking advantage of opportunities. I think we need a headquarters which is breaking through. That's the awareness. It's now. It has to be now. It's not just reporters. I'll be happy that everything will get to the reporters as quickly as possible. But I'm talking about the net, about the network. And we have opportunities. Two examples. One, Silwan says to Slimani, it says we coordinated and we organized those demonstrations, and immediately he was cut off. And you know Bar the Wheel, but you know this one as well. The other one was that thing in the kindergarten. So maybe it was a mistake that the soldier was with uniform. But less than an hour, live, we documented everything that had to do with that kindergarten. We brought the chief of staff, we brought commanders of the American army to see this kindergarten and all the media. And they came to see it with their own eyes and to talk to people in the area. Another opportunity we took advantage of, every Friday, Hamas gave the names to the Fridays, and the moment they did it, we called it the Tire Friday, tires. We said that the tires are persecuting you. We made a great effort to show how they also jeopardize the environment, and that was very, very important for the world. There were tires and burning tires and ruined the environment, and we made a campaign, and that was a real... Immediately we got attacked by it, but they dealt with it and they reacted to it. The other thing was the Friday of the revolutionary youngsters. That's how they called it. We called it the Friday of the frustrated youngsters. And Muhammad Salah, when he was playing football, he did. He scored a goal. We have to do something else. Muhammad Salah is on the one hand, and the other thing is what's happening in Gaza. And that really became the conversation of the day. Conversation of the Gaza was the campaign of the frustrated of the IDF spokesman. That's another opportunity in Kerem Shalom at the border. Hamas couldn't control the event, and they actually ignited their own crossing. And this, we said, that's what's happening to you, that's what ruins your life, with numbers of how many trucks were burnt and couldn't bring supply to Gaza. We called it direct discourse. We realized that in some of the places we do not manage to speak with our direct messages to the public. We have to find another way. We did it in English and Arabic. We used Islamic motives, real ones, throughout these weeks. We used all sorts of decrees of the religious leaders. It says don't do violence, don't put women in the front line. And they really couldn't believe how we dared to do it, but we did. And we were criticized, but every Friday we published a ruling by a great leader, a religious leader and the IDF spokesman. And look what's happening in the Palestinian street. Everybody dealt with it. All the satire programs, They really dealt with this event. And another thing we did was an initiative of direct discourse with the seniors of Hamas. If we can't speak to them directly, we can speak with them on the web. And I said, go talk to Rabbi Marzouk. He's a murderer, he's a slaughterer. Let's speak to him on the web, on the website. Just a quote of what he wrote to us. Anybody who follows you in the Twitter has to speak to stop following it. This is by decree of Allah. And then he said that burning of wheels, and the spokesman said, what's happening with you, Abu Musa? And we prepared a song that we wrote about burning tires and how terrible it is and what's it going to do. Also in international arena, we directly approached them. It's an article I wrote with my name under it. I realized we cannot explain our Israeli narrative to the international public, and we wrote an article that 4 of us are trying to tell the real story, and we gave it to a few newspapers, and they said that they had enough of this subject, they don't want to bother, but it came to a good place, and it had an impact on the Arab world. And whether you know it or not, I was invited next week to talk to the General Assembly in France as part of that understanding that we have something to say as well, that apparently we have something that can be heard in this contest. And the last thing, the direct approach to the Gaza people. We decided to put a rift between the people in the Gaza and their leadership that promotes the demonstrations. We used a lot of things to show where are you and where are they. And we talked about Bardawil, that he said that the Israelis managed to put a rift between us and our public. And they responded with the kites. And the last mission was to refute rumors with that nurse, the woman that was Rozan Najjar, that the IDF spokesman officially announced that it was a mistake, that it wasn't targeted, it wasn't directed. And this movie, both in English and in Arabic, and we thought that the Arab campaign to turn her into an angel in white, we started criticizing that you show her close to smoke, and she said, I'm a human shield. She said it herself, and that's the movie we prepared, hundreds of thousands of viewers, and we got criticized. Why do you cut her? Why don't you make her say that she's a human shield? Finally, we did it because we wanted it to be 15 seconds. And people cut me when I speak and cut others as well. So this thing was a campaign, counter-campaign for them. They portrayed her as an angel in white, and we said that we did not target her, it was a mistake. And the second thing was that the baby that the Hamas said that she died because she inhaled smoke. We were in a dilemma because we couldn't know if it's true or not, although we felt it wasn't. So that was our first. We said that we're doubting the Palestinian claim. And this complaint that started with this Twitter brought about the fact that the government in Gaza said that she did not die in the events. It started with this Twitter. They admitted because they realized that we have good reasons to doubt it. I want to tell you what happened in these 12 weeks. I think that our cognitive campaign was unprecedented in its numbers. I don't think we can compare it to one headline or another. And I will read out the next quote. It's again of Bardawil. Maybe I'll start paying him a salary because he ends his article, which is called the gods of the Zionist taboo that we have to shatter. That's us. And he talks about the fact that the Zionist propaganda turns every truth into a lie. And he said what the spokesman says, he's the face of the ugly Zionism. And he spoke about the IDF spokesman. Let him bark, let him jump, let him shatter their gods. We are the people who have the right to fight and to destroy. There's no way to fight them except to cope with them, to expose their forgery and to show their lies to the entire world. And that's the last sentence. At the end of the day, he says, if we shatter the head of the god, we can kill it or finish it off.